Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Joe. As anyone who's been watching the History Corner, or if you're watching this on Storyfire and watching our Storyfire content, knows. And here's me essentially returning to some of my more, academic roots. I'm not going to be doing this for every epic poem out there, and know that I am planning to at some point do more history podcasts like the Clavis à Charles set of videos on the History Corner. Maybe I'll upload those to Storyfire later. Anyways, the video focus here is going to be on the Brus poem, the national epic of Scotland. And this is a poem which I've only read passages of before, and so this is my first time going through it. But as part of going through it, I've decided to start translating it into English and French. And I figure that this will be a bit of my report assignments of sorts that I'll try to do on a bi-monthly level or something. Hopefully this will mean that there's more regular content on the History Corner. But who knows? I'm joking about that. But last part. But anyways, these videos won't be complex beasts because I don't want to make complex videos within this playlist. I just want it to be focused on the poem. Now, the poem starts off with, as you can see from the screen, and I've only copied a few bits, so because I'm working with the physical copy, and it has, for example, most of the verses numbered, which I'm going to be operating with that, as it seems like a good standard to hold to, even as I read Gothidan, both in English and French, and try to compose a few of my own epic poems. So, as part of that, I'm doing this study on the Brus poem, which is kind of like the Scottish Beowulf, in a way, except dedicated to Robert the Bruce, the greatest of all kings of the Isles of Great Britain, primarily Scotland. So, as all Scottish viewers, if there are any, might know. Now, the poem starts off, stories to read are delectable. Suppose that they be not but fable, then should stories that soothfast were, and they wars. No, what was it? I think it was. Sorry, this is Scots. Not my favorite. Not my first language. Actually, I really love the language, so it's actually one of my favorites. And the war said. Now, my translations, my Scots copy is the same as this, so bear that in mind. And what was it? The war said on good manner have double pleasance in hearing. And I'll get to all the minor translation stuff in a moment. The first pleasance is the carping, and the other the soothfastness. Now, I did make it to that showis. I have no idea what this word is right here. So if anyone knows, tell me in the comment section. I tried looking it up. I've struggled. I'm not a philologist, but I'm trying my hand here. Now, I'll get to my translation in a moment. Now, first off, let me just reveal first, soothfast. This means truthful or loyal and true. It's an archaic adjective from early English, or Middle English, I should say. And the way it works in sentence structures appears to be what they soothfast appear, or if yon realms in sunset glow be bubbles of. Okay, whoops. I care not if the pomps you show be what they soothfast appear. So, another way of reading it would be, I care not if the pomps you show be what they truly appear. That's how we'd say it in modern English. But soothfast is how they would say it in previous centuries. So that takes care of that. Next, comes dilatable, which is a word meaning expansion. Air is dilatable, dilatable by heat. A bladder is dilatable by the force of air. Or you have, it's something that's about possessing elasticity. So, as you could see here, so what we're seeing here are older terms, and it should come as no surprise, as this was an epic poem composed by Jean Barbour, who was a native of Aberdeen, and a very well-educated man and a great poet, better than myself, for example. And now let's get to my translated works, or my attempts here. Now I'm actually going to zoom in for a minute because I want you to be able to see this. And I'll probably upload these to Storyfire and maybe Patreon, respectively, as I go along, so that people could read this, because this is not just going to be me hogging it to myself. But just know, I'm going to try to only update when I've got the full book, so it'll take time. Now, and I hope that this will also get people to come to love Scottish literature and history as I've come to love it. I love Scottish folktales. I've read quite a few. I love Scottish literature. You look at Ivanhoe, you look at Treasure Island. These are Scottish pieces of literature, and there's older ones. So my hope is to kind of get people into the beautiful traditions that Scottish civilization has to offer. It's a very, very beautiful thing. Piece of literature that they have. Now, you have here, stories to read are dilatable. Suppose that they be naught but fable, then should stories that soothfast were. And they wore... Now, I made a mistake here, so I'll just correct it. And the war said on good manner, have double pleasance in hearing. The first pleasance is the carping. Now, carping means to nitpick at trivial details or find fault in trivial details. And so the first pleasance is the carping, is the criticism, so to speak. And the other, the soothfastness, the truthfulness. So there's a double pleasance in hearing a story or, an epic poem like this. What Barbour is telling us is the first is in the finding little faults to criticize. The second is in the truthfulness of the tale, which I really like this. This is typical of the Scots. He's playing a bit of a word game there. Now for our French version. For those who speak French, this will be hopefully a bit of a pleasure. For those who don't, I'm sorry. Contes à lire sont dilatables, suppose qu'ils ne sont que des fables. Les contes à paysards et la guerre dite de bonne manière sont doublement plaisants à écouter. La première plaisir, c'est de le critiquer. Now, soothfastness is where I actually stopped here. More because I'm trying to retain the rhyming structure for the most part, or at least maybe not the same, but here, I'll just make this bigger real quick. I want there to be a rhyme because part of poetry is the rhyming structure. If you don't have that, something just feels off when you're listening to an epic poem. So what's needed is for both English and French to retain the rhyme of sorts, or at least a rhyming structure. And so I have the double task of translating the poem into French, a language it was never supposed to be translated, I think, into to an extent, or at least it's not originally in French, and French is a very different language from English and Scots. But the idea is to translate and rhyme it so that there's a musical quality to the French work. So that way you have, in essence, the spirit of the poem retained. Because when you look at... Oops. Yeah, I had to look it up. When you look at... Because I had intended to do a full thing with carping, but what about it? It's just criticism. But when you look at this poem, delectable, fable, whir, manner, hearing, carping, soothfastness, as it was, you see, you have here a rhyming structure. One which goes with every two lines. So you might have, say, A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. You know, that sort of thing you learn in school. So I need to retain that for the French version. Let me save that. And that's the whole idea. Now, I will, as we go along, kind of recount what the tale is about, what the poem's about. And the idea of the overall epic poem is that it's about the Scottish Wars of Independence, about how Robert the Bruce and his lieutenant, Lieutenant James Douglas, the Black Douglas, fought for the liberty of Scotland, doing so against the English. And this was, they were honestly men of their times, but they were also very heroic men worth aspiring to. And so when you look at poems like this, I think that the goal with the English version is to make it, translate it, maybe not into today's English completely, but at least make it kind of in a variant of English that people can understand. I think that the OG edition, for the most part, which I think was edited by A.A.M. Duncan, which is a fantastic copy. Get yourself an edition if you want to keep up, because this is also going to be in part a book club podcast. And I will be going over some of his notes, which do seem quite worth it, as he has quite a few interesting notes to add. He doesn't block out the poem, but he just puts his own notes in between certain sections, mostly the various books. So this is a very important work in medieval literature. It's a great poem, probably the best epic poem in medieval literature, I find. And so, as far as the Scottish literary tradition, this is every bit as important as Chaucer or La Morte d'Arthur, in my opinion, which are themselves great books. And so, what we've got here is me wanting to make the Brus poem, which I called here just as a working title. I should probably change it to the modern English one. There. The Brus. And I'm going to kind of keep this one of it. Let's change it into this. There. Now, what I'm wanting to do for the English edition is, now I'm struggling to understand the Scots, so I'm translating it kind of also for myself, and then I'm going to probably self-publish this, because why not? I don't really care to go through the entire publishing industry for this. And this would be so that people have, in essence, a modern translation of sorts of the overall poem. Now, I will not be putting in any notes between the various book stuff for the most part, because if you want the notes from a reputable professional, I recommend you get your copy. Duncan is a brilliant historian in his own right, and I don't want to steal his sales. I just simply think that we need to, I'm trying to put in a simplified version into English so that the English can come to appreciate their Scottish neighbors and understand that the Scots have a beautiful literary tradition all their own. And I think that if it gets more English to learning Scots and Gaelic, then all the better. And pour les Français, I love the French language. This is my first language, so I have to translate it into French. And this would be to get the already Scotophile France to invest even more into Scotland a little, at least emotionally and culturally, because Scotland is worth it. On the other hand, quand ça vient avec l'Écosse, my other view is that when it comes to Scotland, that there is the Auld Alliance, so that France and Scotland are intricately interwoven into the fabric of each other's societies and histories. And if you want to know more about the Auld Alliance, I could always later do a series of videos on that. But the goal here is to first approach the literary tradition of that era, at least in the form of this Brus poem, and then approach the actual history. But because the history podcast always takes so much time to write and whatnot, so much more than any other script for our various channels, because history requires so much more research, because you have to fact check yourself, you need to write down your script, you need to make sure you have your primary sources, your secondary sources all in order, because you need to consult both. As a historian, you cannot consult only one. But the beauty of just simply doing a translation of an epic poem is that I'm not double checking all that, I'm just sticking to the linguistics, which is in itself pretty fun. So as for the French, we have a history of being Scotophiles. I simply wish to translate for my fellow frogs this poem, which I love so much. Like I said, I've read only various passages. I actually really love the Aeneid probably the best. I love the Aeneid. But this Brus poem is rapidly becoming a bit of a love of mine, although the language is far more intricate and difficult for me to grasp. But the Aeneid copy I've read was translated into modern English so that I could understand it. And I've read bits and pieces here and there in French, but this is my first time trying a translation work. So let's hope that I can do a good enough job like the translations I've seen. And let's hope that this ends up being a fun enough playlist that people will enjoy, and we'll get to see a bit of the creative and the linguistic process here. This will be not done in place of other history cinema videos on the History Corner, so that we will be continuing with reviews of shows like Black Sails, maybe older historic dramas and movies, because there are some that I really want to take a look at. And I do plan to do maybe a history book club podcast, not only continuing the Jeanne d'Arc thing, but also of primary sources and secondary sources, so that Dan and I might sit down and just read something like Caesar's Civil Wars or Gallic Wars, or maybe we'll read Plutonius or Tacitus or something. And I'm also thinking, if need be, we'll try reading the Heike Monogatari. Basically, we're going to start reading historic primary sources, and at some point, probably in the following months, once we're settled and done with our move. But for now, there will be mostly movie and shows reviewed and the Brus poem. So for those of you on Storyfire, this is just an extra piece of work I'll occasionally be doing and uploading for you all. And it'll not be replacing Prydain or Narnia. Those will continue. This is just something that will occasionally be added. And hopefully we'll get another Star Wars video out for you all, because Star Wars we've kind of delayed for a bit because we've been busy with a lot of other life stuff, in real life stuff. So hopefully we'll get that all sorted for you all. And don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button, as though you were the Brus taking apart Henry de Beauharnais with his axe.